and we discussed about how we can bind by using interpolation and by using attribute binding and property binding. That means binding to attribute, binding to property, and interpolation. These are the three things. All these are one-way binding. Now we need to understand another important, how we can handle two-way binding. Two-way binding. How to deal with two-way binding. Generally, two-way binding is, so it is a technique where the model is a single source of truth. That means model contains continuous updates. Model contains continuous updates. Actually, model changes are updated to view, and any change in the view will be updated to model. That is what actually two-way binding is. So Angular uses MVC and MVVM for two-way binding. It uses MVC and MVVM for two-way binding. So how actually two-way binding works, we will see that. And MVC, MVVM, because in MVC actually we have a model. It represents and contains data. And view, it presents the data. So these are the two important options you need to understand. So model represents and contains the data, and view presents the data. Of course, controller defines the actions. That means application logic. So it defines the actions. Actions actually indicates when to update the data. Such actions are defined by the controller actually. So important is how this works in our Angular, because you saw in the last session we are able to bind, but any change we are performing, those changes are not updated. So those changes are not updated to the model. So actually, to understand this, you need 2 points here. So what are the 2 points? You need to understand two important points actually. One is means how the two-way binding works. Actually, in two-way binding, model plays the key role. Model plays the key role. Actually, we have view. We have view. And we have controller. Generally, what happens is that is in MVC architecture. So whatever data is needed, data is in model. And in MVC architecture, you don't need a controller. So it uses an model and a view model. So it uses an view model actually. It uses an view model. Model and view model. It uses an view model. So usually what happens is the model and view model. So technically how it works generally is data is defined here. Data is defined in model. This data is binded to view. Binded to view. How it is binded to view? Generally, we use property binding. This is actually property. This is property binding. By using property binding to any property in the view, we bind the data. Okay. That means, for example, we have a text box. Text box have a value. So value is a property. To the value property, we bind the data. Usually we do that. Okay. So the square brace indicates that we are using, we are binding to the property. Okay. Next, how model knows that change happened inside the view. That means how model knows that some change happened inside the text box. Inside the text box. Usually, if I made any change in the text box, actually an event should fire up. An event should fire up. You know, event identifies the changes inside the control, like button click, text box have a change event. It uses an event to identify the change occurred, and usually this event notifies the change to the model. Notifies the change to the model, and model will get that updated details. That means the model data comes to view by using property binding. Again, from view, it goes back to model by using event binding. Who will notify that change happened? So the event will notify actually. And in Angular, events we will learn in a separate session. But as of now, in order to understand the current concept, you should know that events are written in the parentheses